Barnabas, born Joseph, was an early Christian, one of the prominent Christian disciples in Jerusalem. According to Acts chapter 4 verse 36, Barnabas was a Cypriot Jew, named an apostle in Acts chapter 14 verse 14. He and Paul the apostle undertook missionary journeys together and defended Gentile converts against the Judaizers. They traveled together making more converts and participated in the Council of Jerusalem. Barnabas and Paul successfully evangelized among the God-fearing Gentiles who attended synagogues in various Hellenized cities of Anatolia. Barnabas' story appears in the Acts of the Apostles, and Paul mentions him in some of his epistles. Tertullian named him as the author of the Epistle to the Hebrews, but this and other attributions are conjecture. Clement of Alexandria and some scholars have ascribed the Epistle of Barnabas to him, but his authorship is disputed. Although the date, place, and circumstances of his death are historically unverifiable, Christian tradition holds that Barnabas was martyred at Salamis, Cyprus, in AD 61. He is traditionally identified as the founder of the Cypriot Orthodox Church. The feast day of Barnabas is celebrated on June 11. Barnabas is usually identified as the cousin of Mark the Evangelist on the basis of Colossians chapter 4. Some traditions hold that Aristobulus of Britannia, one of the 70 disciples, was the brother of Barnabas. Name and etymologies. His Hellenic Jewish parents called him Joseph, but when he sold all his goods and gave the money to the apostles in Jerusalem, they gave him a new name, Barnabas. This name appears to be from the Aramaic Barnabia, meaning the son prophet. However, the Greek text of the Acts chapter 4 verse 36 explains the name as Upsilon Omicron Sigma Pi Alpha Rho Alpha Kappa Lambda Eta Sigma Epsilon Omega Sigma Hyos Paraklasios, meaning son of consolation or son of encouragement. A similar link between prophecy and encouragement is found in Paul's letter to the Corinthians. Biblical narrative. Barnabas appears mainly in Acts, a Christian history of the early Christian church. He also appears in several of Paul's epistles. Barnabas, a native of Cyprus and a Levite, is first mentioned in the Acts of the Apostles as a member of the early Christian community in Jerusalem, who sold some land that he owned and gave the proceeds to the community. When the future apostle Paul returned to Jerusalem after his conversion, Barnabas introduced him to the apostles. Easton, in his Bible dictionary, supposes that they had been fellow students in the school of Rabbi Gamaliel. The successful preaching of Christianity at Antioch to non-Jews led the church at Jerusalem to send Barnabas there to oversee the movement. He found the work so extensive and weighty that he went to Tarsus in search of Paul, an admirable colleague, to assist him. Paul returned with him to Antioch and labored with him for a whole year. At the end of this period, the two were sent up to Jerusalem with contributions from the church at Antioch for the relief of the poorer Christians in Judea. They returned to Antioch taking John Mark with them, the cousin and nephew of Barnabas. Later, they went to Cyprus and some of the principal cities of Pamphylia, Pisidia, and Lycaonia. After recounting that the governor of Cyprus Sergius Paulus believed, the Acts of the Apostles 13-9 speaks of Barnabas's companion no longer as Saul, but as Paul, his Roman name, and generally refers to the two no longer as Barnabas and Saul, as heretofore, but as Paul and Barnabas. Only in 14:14 and 15:12-25 does Barnabas again occupy the first place in the first passage, with recollection of 14:12 in the last two, because Barnabas stood in closer relation to the Jerusalem church than Paul. Paul appears as the more eloquent missionary, whence the Lystrans regarded him as Hermes, Barnabas as Zeus. Returning from this first missionary journey to Antioch, they were again sent up to Jerusalem to consult with the church regarding the relation of Gentiles to the church. According to Gal. 2-9-10, Barnabas was included with Paul in the agreement made between them on the one hand, and James, Peter, and John on the other, that the two former should in the future preach to the pagans, not forgetting the poor at Jerusalem. This matter having been settled, they returned again to Antioch, bringing the agreement of the council that Gentiles were to be admitted into the church without having to adopt Jewish practices. After they had returned to Antioch from the Jerusalem council, they spent some time there. Peter came and associated freely with the Gentiles, eating with them, until criticized for this by some disciples of James, as against Mosaic law. Upon the remonstrances, Peter yielded apparently through fear of displeasing them, and refused to eat any longer with the Gentiles. Barnabas followed his example. Paul considered that they walked not uprightly according to the truth of the gospel, and upbraided them before the whole church. Paul then asked Barnabas to accompany him on another journey. Barnabas wished to take John Mark along, but Paul did not, as he had left them on the earlier journey. The dispute ended by Paul and Barnabas taking separate routes. Paul took Silas as his companion, and journeyed through Syria and Cilicia, while Barnabas took John Mark to visit Cyprus. John Francis Fenland suggests that Paul may have been somewhat influenced by the attitude recently taken by Barnabas, which might have proven prejudicial to the work. Barnabas is not mentioned again in the Acts of the Apostles. However, Galatians chapter 2 verses 11-13 says, "And when Cephas came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face because he clearly was wrong. For, until some people came from James, he used to eat with the Gentiles. But when they came, he began to draw back and separated himself, because he was afraid of the circumcised. And the rest of the Jews acted hypocritically along with him, with the result that even Barnabas was carried away by the hypocrisy." Barnabas is also mentioned in the first epistle to the Corinthians, in which it is mentioned that he and Paul funded the missions by working side jobs and went without wives and other benefits other apostles received. Paul states that he and Barnabas forsook those benefits, that we may cause no hindrance to the good news of Christ. Barnabas and Antioch. Antioch, the third most important city of the Roman Empire, then the capital city of Syria province, today Antakya, Turkey, was where Christians were first called thus. Some of those who had been scattered by the persecution that arose because of Stephen went to Antioch, which became the site of an early Christian community. A considerable minority of the Antioch church of Barnabas's time belonged to the merchant class, and they provided support to the poorer Jerusalem church. Council of Jerusalem. Barnabas participated in the Council of Jerusalem, which dealt with the admission of Gentiles into the Christian community, a crucial problem in early Christianity. Paul and Barnabas proposed that Gentiles be allowed into the community without being circumcised. Martyrdom. Church tradition developed outside of the canon of the New Testament describes the martyrdom of many saints, including the legend of the martyrdom of Barnabas. It relates that certain Jews coming to Syria and Salamis, where Barnabas was then preaching the gospel, being highly exasperated at his extraordinary success, fell upon him as he was disputing in the synagogue, dragged him out and, after the most inhumane tortures, stoned him to death. His kinsman, John Mark, who was a spectator of this barbarous action, privately interred his body, although it is believed he was martyred of faith by being stoned. The Catholic apocryphal Acts of Barnabas states that he was bound with a rope by the neck, and then being dragged only to the side where he would be burned to death. This is highly unlikely, since the apocryphal Acts states that his bones were burned to dust and that relics of some of his bones are stored in a church today. On the other hand, the fire in the apocryphal Acts could have cremated only some of his bones. According to the history of the Cyprus church, in 478 Barnabas appeared in a dream to the archbishop archbishop of Constantia Anthemios, and revealed to him the place of his sepulchre beneath the carob tree. The following day Anthemios found the tomb, and inside it the remains of Barnabas, with a manuscript of Matthew's Gospel on his breast. Anthemios presented the Gospel to Emperor Zeno at Constantinople and received from him the privileges of the Greek Orthodox Church of Cyprus, that is, the purple cloak which the Greek Archbishop of Cyprus wears at festivals of the Church, the imperial scepter, and the red ink with which he affixes his signature. Anthemios then placed the venerable remains of Barnabas in a church which he founded near the tomb. Excavations near the site of a present-day church and monastery have revealed an early church with two empty tombs, believed to be that of Saint Barnabas and Anthemios. Saint Barnabas is venerated as the patron saint of Cyprus. Alleged writings. Tertullian and other Western writers regard Barnabas as the author of the letter to the Hebrews. This may have been the Roman tradition, which Tertullian usually follows, and in Rome the epistle may have had its first readers, but the tradition has weighty considerations against it. Photius of the 9th century refers to some in his day who were uncertain whether the Acts was written by Clement of Rome, Barnabas, or Luke. Yet Photius is certain that the work must be ascribed to Luke. Quote, "He is also traditionally associated with the Epistle of Barnabas, although some modern scholars think it more likely that that epistle was written in Alexandria in the 130s. John Dominic Crossan quotes Coester as stating that New Testament writings are used neither explicitly nor tacitly in the Epistle of Barnabas, and that this would argue for an early date, perhaps even before the end of ICE. Crossan continues, Richardson and Schuckster have also argued for a 1st century date. Among several arguments they point to the detail of a little king, who shall subdue 3 of the kings under one, and a little crescent horn, and that it subdued under one 3 of the great horns, in Barnabas 4:4-5. They propose a composition date during or immediately after the reign of Nerva, viewed as bringing to an end the glorious Flavian dynasty of Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian, when a powerful, distinguished, and successful dynasty was brought low, humiliated by an assassin's knife. In 16-3-4, the Epistle of Barnabas says, "Furthermore he says again, Lo, they who destroyed this temple shall themselves build it." That is happening now, for owing to the war it was destroyed by the enemy. At present even the servants of the enemy will build it up again. Quote, "This clearly places Barnabas after the destruction of the temple in 70 CE, but it also places Barnabas before the Bar Kokhba revolt in 132 CE, after which there could have been no hope that the Romans would help to rebuild the temple. This shows that the document comes from the period between these two revolts." J. Curry Treat states on the dating of Barnabas, since Barnabas 16-3 refers to the destruction of the temple, Barnabas must be written after 70 CE. It must be written before its first indisputable use in Clement of Alexandria, California, 190. Since 16-4 expects the temple to be rebuilt, it was most likely written before Hadrian built a Roman temple on the site, California, 135. Attempts to use 4-4-5 and 16-1-5 to specify the time of origin more exactly have not won wide agreement. It is important to remember that traditions of varying ages have been incorporated into this work. Treat comments on the provenance of the Epistle of Barnabas. Barnabas does not give enough indications to permit confident identification of either the teacher's location of the location to which he writes. His thought, hermeneutical methods, and style have many parallels throughout the known Jewish and Christian worlds. Most scholars have located the work's origin in the area of Alexandria, on the grounds that it has many affinities with Alexandrian Jewish and Christian thought and because its first witnesses are Alexandrian. Recently, Prigent, Wengst, and Scorza Barcelona have suggested other origins based on affinities in Palestine, Syria, and Asia Minor. The place of origin must remain an open question, although the GK-speaking Mediterranean appears most probable. Concerning the relationship between Barnabas and the New Testament, Treat writes, although Barnabas 4:14 appears to quote Matt 22:14, it must remain an open question whether the Barnabas circle knew written Gospels. Based on Coester's analysis, it appears more likely that Barnabas stood in the living oral tradition used by the written Gospels. For example, the reference to gall and vinegar in Barnabas 7:3-5 seems to preserve an early stage of tradition that influenced the formation of the Passion narratives in the Gospel of Peter and the Synoptic Gospels. The 5th century Decretum Jerusalem.According includes a Gospel of Barnabas amongst works condemned as apocryphal, but no certain text or quotation from this work has been identified. Another book using that same title, the Gospel of Barnabas, survives in 2 post-medieval manuscripts in Italian and Spanish, contrary to the canonical Christian Gospels, and in accordance with the Islamic view of Jesus. This later Gospel of Barnabas states that Jesus was not the Son of God, but a prophet and messenger. The book also says Jesus rose alive into heaven without having been crucified and mentions Muhammad by name. Though the exact dating is disputed, the work is not regarded as authentic by any scholar.